Hi, this is Kevin, and I am a strategist at Cubicle Fugitive. In this video, I'm going to be talking about resources, specifically videos, podcasts, and media post. I'm going to create a new post, but instead of using the create function, I'm going to use the duplicate a pre-existing media post as a starting point. So today I'm going to duplicate this test podcast 1 into a new podcast post. To access the podcast or media section inside Sitefinity from the dashboard, we would go to Content, and then under Resources and Insights, you'll see Videos, Podcast, and Media. And we'll click on that, and that will bring us up a list of all current media posts on our site. Now, instead of clicking on the green Create a Medium button, we are going to click the checkbox next to Test Podcast 1, which is my starting point, my pre-existing media post. And once I click that checkbox, the action menu appears below Mediums. And in that menu, I have the option to duplicate. And that's what I'm going to click. And that'll open up the Medium Content Editor page. And it looks like I'm editing Test Podcast 1. But it's actually a duplicate. This is just a placeholder at the moment. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is change the title of this post. So test duplicated podcast is what I'll call this one. Next up is the media type. And because I picked a previous post to duplicate, it already is filled in with podcast. And since it's a podcast I'm posting today, I don't need to change that. That's the benefit of selecting your pre-existing post purposefully. The more aligned it is with your new post, the less changes you'll have to make on this page as we go. The other great thing about duplicating a post as a starting point is you get to see exactly what areas on this input form you filled in for the previous, so you know exactly what to fill in for the new. And as you can see, I had nothing entered under summary or main content previously, and it is a good assumption that I don't need those filled in for this new podcast either. Now, next up is the embed code, and as you can see right now, you see Media Player from the previous podcast, and it can be a little bit tricky to get in there and delete the old, but you'll just want to try to click somewhere inside the box but not on the graphic, which I, of course, messed up. Sometimes it's easier to click just in front of the previous post, but inside the box, and then hit the delete button. And now what you'll want to do is paste in the new embed code from your new podcast. So I've already found my HTML that I need to copy and paste into here. And we click on the to embed media. Once we're inside of a rich text input box, across this top menu, the play triangle inside of a circle looks like a play button is the embed button. And if I click on that, I can now paste HTML directly into this box. And Sitefinity instantly recognizes it as an audio podcast link code. And I can simply click insert once it's recognized it. And there you see the podcast appears, the podcast player appears in that box now. The next field is the featured item checkbox, which would help elevate this new post to the top of my media list and keep it pinned there for maybe this is an exceptional podcast that will be relevant for some time, and I want to make sure that any new media posts in the next little while don't bump it down the list. I want to keep it top and center of mind for people. Next is the related content section. And again, this is already pre-filled with the same associations the original podcast that I duplicated had. And again, that's the benefit of duplicating. I don't have to go through these again. I know that this new podcast is very similar to the previous one, and I can leave these as is. But if I did want to change, I could hover over and click the X to remove an expertise or team member. I could also also add more if, let's say Burhan was also associated with this podcast, this new podcast. Then we have the ability to change the primary image associated with this podcast, which you can choose from your pre-existing images on your Sitefinity library, in your Sitefinity libraries, or upload a new. And of course, you have the ability to attach a related document, perhaps a transcript of the podcast. So once you scroll down and check that you have everything either filled in correctly or modified as needed for the new podcast, you can hit save as draft and preview, or you can hit publish and make the post live, which I am going to do now. And then I'm going to go back to the front end of my demo site and refresh this media page, so you can now see there is my test duplicated podcast right there. So this is how we would duplicate a video or podcast post to create a new one in Sitefinity CMS.